All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Pembroke Center. My name is Amanda Boston, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Africana Studies. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America and the Graduate School. And CSREA is an interdisciplinary hub that aims to build community with the public and among scholars and students working on race and ethnicity in America. So today we welcome Dr. Jeanine Staples, an Associate Professor of Literacy and Language, African American Studies, and Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the Pennsylvania State University. And her scholarship, teaching, and coaching make explicit anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-ableist education for individuals, schools, and society. And her lecture is entitled You Need Another Lover, and it draws from research related to her published book, The Revelations of Asher Toward Supreme Love and Self. And that book explores identities developed by marginalized women in relationships and their individual and collective, and the consequences of those relationships for their individual and collective well-being. And the book is really, really amazing. I think many of you will find it fascinating and resonant as well, and I'm grateful to have been introduced to your work through CSREA and Professor Rose. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Jeanine Staples.
And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Today it's a real pleasure and an honor to be presenting my research here at Brown University. This is my first stop of about 7 different stops that I'll be making this semester, so I'm really excited that you're my first spot in the spring semester. So as a show of hands, I just want to kind of get to know the crowd. How many people actually read my book? Just a handful of people? Okay. So nobody else is really familiar. What I'm going to talk to you today about is lover identity. It's a concept that I am presenting to the field to help us to understand social identities in a more sort of varied and impactful way. And also terror. I'm going to be talking to you about relational and social terror. When I say that you need another lover, what I mean is you need another lover identity, particularly if you are a person who's been marginalized in any way and subject to relational and social terrors, which I will define in a minute. So this is the definition of lover identity. Your lover identity is your entire relational ideology and way of being. It's the way that you understand love and loving, even sex and sexuality, physicality, emotionality. Your lover identity is enacted by you. You're doing your lover identity right now in every relationship that you generate and co-generate. So you're doing your lover identity in your romantic relationships, you're doing it in your professional relationships, you're doing it with your friends, and in your familial relationships as well. It's very important to be very conscious of your lover identity. If you're not, there are lots of ways that you could be sabotaging yourself, and also sabotaging community and institutions of partnership. So what I'm talking about in the book mainly is that a warped lover identity can do lots of damage in society. And one of the things I'm going to talk about today when I talk about relational and social terrors and define them specifically, I'm going to be talking about not only romantic partnerships and intimate relationships, but I'm also going to be talking about what's going on in the world. And I know that we have an understanding of what's going on in the world in the last 10 days. There have been a lot of shifts. And a lot of those shifts are bound up in the spiritual, in the emotional, and also in the material and concretized world. And we're experiencing the manifestations of a lot of these shifts. And a lot of them are terroristic. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came into this research, how I sort of stumbled upon it. It was definitely serendipitous. When I was a graduate student, right after 9/11, I was very, very hyper-conscious. I was very, very aware of what was going on around me, and I noticed that the media landscape was shifting and changing. I started to see lots of representations of Black and brown women, and their narratives and the stories that they were being told were told about them, and they were telling had a lot to do with their subjugation, their repression in lots of different societies, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And so as a Black woman, I felt the need to form some sort of solidarity with Black and brown women here in the States to do some work, social justice work for women over in those other nations. So what I did was I gathered a group of women together, started talking about the popular culture narratives that I saw rising up in media landscapes, and I said, let's do something about this. And what I thought as a student was that, I made a lot of assumptions. I thought what would happen is the women that I gathered together were very much like me, post-adolescent, young adult women, college-educated, sort of middle class. I thought that we would want to raise money that had to do with, forming a school, maybe petitioning the government for women's right to vote. What happened was the opposite of what I could have ever expected. The women that I gathered together actually said they felt more astonished and more offended and more troubled by the fact that the women in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East were being repressed in terms of their ability to choose partnership, to choose parenting, to choose sexual and social relationships, and that they wanted to focus on getting rights and privileges in relation to those social, emotional, physical, sexual, and cultural freedoms. And at first, I thought, maybe they missed the memo. I was going to build a school so that we could petition that girls would have a proper education, or petition for the right to vote, or inherit property. And it pulled me back, and I'm very glad now, all these years later, that I listened to the women that I gathered together. Because what I found is that understanding lover identity actually gave us deeper insights into the ways that citizenship got done in the space of womanhood. So, the questions that I started to generate had to do with what it meant to live an experience in a social context in which one could not choose partnership, could not choose style of dress, adornment, could not choose when and where to parent, or how many children to parent, could not choose sexual partnership and relationship, how that stunted the psychological, sociological, emotional, and even spiritual wealth of women. And one of the things that I found out after I said to the women, if we're going to create a context to do social justice work for women around the concept of social, emotional, sexual, and psychological freedom, then we really need to responsibly turn the tables upon ourselves and tell our stories about relationship, emotionality, connectivity, and personal power. And when we turned the lenses on ourselves and the spotlight began to absorb our own stories, what I found was the women that I had gathered together, many of us had also been survivors of sexual abuse, child molestation, rape, infidelity, narcissistic relationships with narcissistic abuse, sort of plentiful in our context, and it became clearer to me. One of the reasons that the women were so committed to understanding what I now call terror narratives of the women that we were poised to serve was because we were suffering from the same terror narratives that they were. Even though we were socioeconomically free, we had political rights and privileges, and we had social capital because of our education, we still were subject to the same kinds of social, psychological, sexual, and emotional repressions. So, what I realized was that some of the external work that we wanted to do in terms of forging social justice movement needed to begin in our own homes, basically. That's when I came up with this idea. And I don't think necessarily that it's novel, but it felt very freeing and liberating to me. And that is that impacting meaningful external revolutions are preceded by impacting meaningful internal revelations. Okay, so if you're taking notes and you want to follow along, write down these numbers. 97531. I'm an interpretivist, I'm a qualitative researcher, social scientist, so I don't deal with numbers very much. But as I came through the ethnographic work that I did, I worked with these women for 10 years. It was 2 years, 10 women over 2 years. I found that this number came up, which is that there were 9 women in the study. I'm the +1. I found 7 fragmented cells in the narrative data that we produced. And that data included email correspondences, interviews, focus group transcripts, instant messaging transcripts, email correspondences. There were 5 lover identities that these fragmented cells produced. And there were 3 effects of the lover identities, and there's 1 solution to the trauma that we experienced. 9 women, 7 fragmented cells, 5 lover identities. 3 effects, 1 solution. This is the infrastructure of my research design. I actually think it's beautiful. What you'll notice is I'm going to take you in the next 45 minutes through this infrastructure so that I can explain to you how I found the toxic lover identities that the women were performing in their everyday lives. We're going to go from left to right across this terrain. I'm going to talk to you about the 9 women. I'm going to talk to you about the 7 fragmented self that I found in the data. I'll talk to you about the 5 lover identities that are performative in everyday life. I'll talk to you about the 3 effects of these lover identities and what kinds of havoc they dole out in relationships, in communities, and also in the world. And then also I'll talk to you about the one solution, which is supreme love. First, the women. That's me. I out myself in the book, I'm Jeanine. Can't tell you who anyone else is. One of the things that I did as a social scientist, and I learned while I was doing this as a graduate student, is that I'm bound to anonymity. And I wondered, over the course of time, if some of the women that I worked with would want to tell their stories, and none of them did. And I know now the reason is that a lot of these women have family and friends who don't know that they were relationally or socially terrorized. And they hide some of these terror narratives, and they keep them under wraps for particular reasons. Everybody encounters their own face of freedom whenever they encounter it. And so, what you're seeing now are artistic representations of the 9 women in the study, along with their students. There's a table in the book that describes specifically how these women self-identified in terms of their race and ethnicity, their age, their professional interests, etc. What I realized as I went through the 2 years of collecting terror narratives with the women, having them tell me about their stories about terror and love, that all signs pointed back to white supremacist patriarchy as an ideological frame that actually creates something of an ambient ghost in our machine. This way of thinking and way of being, this way of cultivating and acting experience and generating ideology actually precedes and incites relational and social terrorism. And I'll explain how in just a second. Now, just to show you again where we are. We are right between the women and the fragmented selves. Okay? As I worked with the women, and before I found the fragmented selves, I noticed in the data that every time a woman talked about some heartbreak, some violence, some abuse, some seminal experience that shaped her perception of relationship, of love, of her body politic, of her ability to connect, it came back to a root of racism, sexism, misogyny, and some variation of even homophobia. And that's when I started to draw my connections. Now I'll explain to you about, let me just show you also the way that this form works. So if you notice the bubbles that come from white supremacist patriarchy and then go down the screen, I'm starting with relational terrors and I'm working my way down to social terrors. I'll explain the concept of terrors to you so that you can follow me. A relational terror is essentially a microaggression, a little t terror. A relational terror, big T, is essentially a macroaggression. I found two types of little t terrors and 2 types of big T terrors. So relational and social little t terrors are what we're going to go over, and we're going to lead into the big T terrors. Here's how you tell the difference. A little t terror, whether it's relational or social, is barely perceptible to someone who is not enduring it. It's a slight, a dismissal, a form of erasure, a level of disrespect, disregard, that actually causes an effect, a psychological, sociological, emotional, even physiological effect on the person who consumes them. A relational little t terror is something that happens in intimate partnership. A social little t terror happens out in public domain. So like in the workplace, for example, in the classroom, in your lab. A big T terror is punishable by the state. That's how you tell the difference. You can file a police report about a big T terror. So whereas the relational and social little t terrors take place in the space of the soul, something that you can think about, you can ruminate over, you feel troubled by, you pick apart, maybe a verbal abuse or emotional neglect. A big T terror, whether it's relational or social, affects the body. It explodes into the skin. So a big T terror, as I said, is punishable by the state, is a rape or battery, molestation, police brutality. Or not only exploding on the skin in terms of physical abuse or violence, but a big T terror actually polices the body. It forms barriers around the body or edges the body out. So we hear a lot of talk now in social justice movements about the body politics of occupying a black space or a female space. If you have black bodies, black female bodies, or white bodies, and how they are given certain capital as you walk into any space or out of a space. A big T terror that is social, for example, edges you out of that capital and that privilege. So let's talk about a few of these relational terrors. So I'm wondering, I hope that you can see this. It shows up so much better on my laptop. I worked with an artist to help to create visual representations of how I imagine relational terrors to actually function in the space of the soul. I think visual representations are very, very important for my work. It's one of the reasons that I work with graphic artists to make my book look the way that it looks, which I can talk about in a minute. So here are a few relational terrors that you may or may not be familiar with. How many, by a show of hands, are familiar with the term narcissistic personality disorder? Great. You know about it textbook? Not about, some people say if you're narcissistic, then you're just vain. It's not what it is. So in doing this study and going through this work, I had to be very, very familiar with narrative psychology and community psychology, even though that's not my field at all. I'm an educational anthropologist. But I learned about narcissistic personality disorder and some of the ways that white supremacist patriarchy actually perpetuates the existence of NPD and upholds it as a masculine trait, a trait that supersedes power and presents authority and savvy and skill. Very, very slick. And so when you see some of these terms here, these are actual relational terrors that can happen when you're in the relationship with someone who suffers from NPD or history violence or sociopathic tendencies. So gaslighting, mirroring, dependency, objectifying, belittling, compulsive lying, cheating, alienation, proxy recruitment. Now, one might ask, why would any woman, or any person for that matter, remain in a relationship where any of this is taking place? And answering that question is a part of what I had to figure out to stop some of the shaming that comes with this type of abuse. It's actually more prevalent and more rampant than we give ourselves knowledge of. Let's look at some social terrors. Social terrors I visualize in a little bit of a different way. Instead of imagining them as a twisting web that sort of rolled over onto each other, I imagine social terrors, little t, as a dark hole that you sort of go down. And that's why I came up with this visual representation. So some of these social terrors have to do with being in public spaces and being alienated or objectified or shamed or dismissed in various ways. And again, because they're little t terrors, they're very, very slight. Very, very slight. I'll give you an example of one. Every year in the summer, I braid my hair and I bead it. I do that in homage to Stevie Wonder and Patrice Rushen. They're great, great performance artists. And invariably, every single summer, I have to stop people from touching me. When I go into public spaces, I usually have a white woman, not a man, who will come up to me and touch my hair. touch my hair on the cornrow, or touch my knees, which hang down to my shoulders. That is a little t terror. Now, one of the slick and really stressful issues pertaining to little t terrors is the fact that the person who endorses them has to explain why they qualify as terrors in the first place. That's a part of the emotional tax that one needs to bear. So, I am imagining that there are some people in the audience who have had a similar experience of being touched without your permission. And some of the arguments and pushback that I get in the community often in relation to that social T terror have to do with flattery. So some people in the audience will say, well, you're being sensitive and touchy and flattering. Because clearly, the person found you so attractive and so interesting, so exotic, so beautiful that they couldn't help but touch you. That's a compliment. So then the onus is upon me to either seize the opportunity to explain why that is not true, or abandon effort, save energy, and move away. Leaving opportunity on the table, saving energy for myself. There are these tests and trials, and again, they're so minute that one could argue that they're irrelevant, immaterial, of no meaningful or significant consequence. And so here's what I would say to anyone who challenges the power of a little t terror, especially in relation to a big T terror. Because we're going to talk about big T terrors. Remember I said they explode onto the skin and they police the body. Social and emotional terrors that are little t actually just affect the soul. Someone once asked me, what is more detrimental? Little t terrors or big T terrors? Clearly expecting that I would say big T terrors, clearly. If you're the subject of physical battery, it's more significant than someone touching your hair in a Target, right? However, that's actually not the case. Big T terrors have built-in social networks that you can access to address those big T terrors. I'm not minimizing them at all. But if you are the victim of one big T terror, just one big T terror, you can go to a hospital, social worker, psychologist, the police department, and there are several people who are members of society, constituents who have authority, who are very well trained to help you to manage those big T terrors, to get some form of justice for those big T terrors, to find resources to help you mediate those big T terrors, to clean up your body, to mend your bones. The little T terrors, though, happen so frequently, so progressively, and accumulate in such great numbers, essentially death by 1,000 paper cuts. And there are very few resources in place to help any one person manage the mammoth number of little T terrors that he or she will experience over the course of their lifetime. So I would say if as a society, we were going to focus our efforts now, we would need to do so in relation to little T terrors. Now let's talk about relational terrors that are big T. For me, these spring up as having a precedent of many, many little t relational terrors springing up like a fountain and overflowing, exploding onto the body. Relational terrors that are big T arrive in intimate partnerships. So they are rape and sexual assault, ranking and comparing physical battery, perfectionism, shoving, pinching, spitting, twisting of arms and limbs, intimidation, particularly coming from an intimate partner that one imagines they have a close and intimate relationship with, a safe relationship with. These are very traumatic. I put suicides, murders, and tortures on the outside between relational and social terrors, big T, because they have a special place. I just added The immigration ban on people of color and Muslims to this slide earlier this week because it qualifies as a social terror. The people who are enduring the result of these executive orders now are being socially terrorized in a big T way. Their bodies are being actually pushed out of safe spaces. Okay. Of course, police brutality, social intimidation, verbal threats, even fetishism, media villainy, and stereotype threat, where actually the body politic of an individual who is marginalized is portrayed and performed in media landscapes over and over and over again as the embodiment of threat. That's also social terror, particularly when we must endure it over the course of a lifetime with very little mediation and very little comfort in relation to it. Okay. So now we're going to move into the 7 fragments themselves. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by this. This is going to be really, really important. So for about 18 months, I told you I worked with the 9 women for 2 years. For about 18 months, I was working with them. And I got into a space where I was doing member checks. Anybody, social scientist, you know what a member check is? That's when you have a session with your participants and you go over transcripts and analytic memos and they check your work to make sure that you documented it properly. You can have like a party of wine and cheese and just look at your transcripts. Look at your journals, look at your analytic memos. So we were having this member check session, and the participant named Paloma had missed 2 sessions before. During that session, Tiana, who was another member of the group, storied for us the second rape that she endured when she was, I think, in undergraduate school and college. Now, if you would ever meet Tiana, she's very, very tiny. She's about this big. She weighs about 85 pounds. She speaks with a very soft, mousy voice. She's the sweetest person that you would ever see. But when she was storying, she was providing that terror narrative to the group. She was profane. She was angry. She was defiant and defensive, raging actually, in her recollection of the event. Since Paloma had missed that session that we had together, we were doing a member check and we were reading over the transcripts. Paloma questioned me. She checked me, which was absolutely her right to do. She said, Jeanine, I think you got this wrong. This can't be Tiana. This doesn't sound like Tiana. This is not her voice. She never speaks this way. Now, in that moment, Tiana had a choice. Because of the confidentiality, she could have denied her own voice in front of everyone else and then called me later to confirm, to add the layer of anonymity to her transcript, which is well within her rights. So I just waited, and I asked Tiana, is this you? Did I get it right? And that's when everything in my research changed, because Tiana claimed her voice and did not deny herself. She said, yes, that is me. That is me. Not even that was me. That is me. And in that moment, I had a eureka. And the eureka moment was, I had heard that voice of rage and anger before in other data sets. It wasn't only in Tiana's transcripts. And at that moment, I got a little bit depressed because I knew that I had an opportunity to go back to 18 months of ethnographic qualitative data and do another layer of analysis again to see if I could find that voice in other data sets, in other transcripts, in other journal writings, in other email correspondences. So I could have written a book that was just straight up narratives from each individual woman. Each person gets a chapter. Nothing fancy, nothing spectacular. But instead, I took the road less traveled. I went back to all my data, did another layer of analysis, and I found these fragmented selves. Essentially, they are voices rising in the data that operationalize emotional centers that provide a space to hold the residue of these relational and social terrors. They're based in the soul and the soma, and they actually have a particular resonance of voice, and they tell particular stories. The narrative structures of fragmented selves became very particular, very specific, and very apparent to me as a lyricist. I learned their voices. And I found these fragmented selves in multiple spaces, in multiple data sets, and I chose to write my book from the perspective of the fragmented selves and not the perspective of the participants. When I made that decision, I was able to distill the essence of the tenor of the relational and social terror that that fragment itself wanted to convey. It created more potent and more powerful narratives. And I'm glad I did it now, at the end of it all. So, here are the 7 fragments themselves that I found. I work with a graphic artist to provide a visual representation of the voices. I decided on lips because the fragments themselves are voices that generate stories. This is the voice of Raja. I gave each fragment itself a name to personify her so that people who engage with my work would find it easier to remember. Raja is the voice of peace, serenity, and wisdom. She speaks in whispers on the page. She is deific in her nature. She calls upon holy texts and invokes godly wisdom into multiple conversations in relation to relational and social terrors. This is Asher. I named my book after Asher. The book is The Revelations of Asher. Asher is the voice of inquiry. She is sassy, she's determined, she's inquisitive, she asks 1,000 questions. She is what I call the teacherly self. She houses interrogation. So she's asking questions. Why did this happen? How did this happen? When did this happen? She's very fact-driven. This is the voice of Maven. Maven is the energetic center that actually captures our mother wisdom. She is the voice of advice, warning, and tradition. Maven doesn't smile much. She's serious. She talks about what you should do, what you ought to do, what you better do. She upholds history and tradition and is serious about it. This is Mason. Do you see how she's smiling too hard? Mason is the name that I gave to the emotional center of need, approval, and people-pleasing. She's desperate for affirmation. She's smiling because she's performing. Highly performing. This is Kagan. The visual representation I chose for Kagan needed to convey that she is the voice that houses sex, sensuality, materialism. She absolutely focuses on concretized things. She generates a lot of want for time, attention, gifts, money. This is Laish. Laish is the fragment itself that houses a space of insecurity, worry, and doubt. She's biting her lip because she is nervous and insecure. And this is Sash. Sash is the first fragment itself that I found. She's the one that I found through Tiana's transcript when she was talking about her second grade. Sash is the voice of anger, rage, indignation, resentment, bitterness, violence. She's snarling because she is the officer of resistance. Now, as I got into the data, I realized that these fragments themselves came up in storytelling in very specific moments in time, and they actualized a particular sense of being in persona that was very, very interesting that I needed to mark. They basically live in what I call places. The place of the spirit, the place of the soul, and the place of the flesh body. Now Raja, you'll notice, lives alone. She essentially is our identity as spirits. The place of the spirit is ethereal, it's truthful, it is very deeply in touch with now, with presence, with the divine. This part of ourselves practices mindfulness by default. This part of ourselves also is in touch with ancient wisdoms, very inclined to theological and ethereal connectivity. This place is our saving grace. Now, the 3 fragmented cells that live under Raja occupy what I call the place of the soul. That's your cognitive space. It's the way where you think through your thoughts. So, Asher, which is our voice of inquiry, questioning, fast determination. She's our driving force to ask these questions upon which the book is based. Maven, mother wit, mother wisdom, focusing on the epicsy and the pride of history and tradition. And Mason, the part of sociocultural, actually the socialization of women that focuses on need, approval, and people-pleasing, all reside in the place of the soul. That's where we think through our performance of womanhood. That's where we construct realities. The last three of the fragmented selves reside in the place of the flesh body, actually explode onto our skin. So in the place of the soul, our fragmented selves, actually what I learned, is actually create meaning. And here, these three fragmented cells living in the space of the body, actually with epigenetic markers, actually create memory. So the soul generates meaning. And the soma, the flesh body, houses memory. This is where you remember every relational and social terror that's ever happened to you. Like from the womb. So the place of the flesh body obviously is very sensual. It's committed to, connected to taste, sight, smell, touch. So that the meanings that we generate in relation to hugging, holding, kissing, actual sexual intercourse are housed in the place of the soma, the flesh body. This place is intense. It bears recall. When we get down closer to sash, which is at the bottom of the flesh body, the bottom, ideologically speaking and conceptually speaking, of the soma, we get into moans and groans and guttural utterings, wails that cannot be actually understood. It's very important for me as a social cultural lyricist because when I found each of these fragmented cells in the data, I had developed an ear for their multivocality by understanding their narrative structure. When I got to sash, she was so profane on the page and so angry, sometimes she would actually growl. So it's important to note that, particularly when I go into a space where I'm going to teach women how to develop an ear for their own multivocality and understand the voices of their fragmented selves and how they erupt in soul and soma so you can get to know yourself better. Have to understand your own language. Okay, so now, here we are moving over into the lover identities where I said you need another lover. That was all foundational to get you set up. So, the 7 fragmented cells are basically conceptual. They operate as a part of the soul and the soma. They're a part of our interior life. Our lover identities, though, are a part of our exterior life. So basically, your fragmented selves are not notable to anyone outside of yourself. You know your own fragmented selves. I have this framework where I can listen to you talk and I can pick up on which fragmented self is dominant in your soul or in your soma, but you know better than I do. But your lover identity goes beyond the interiority of your fragmented cells and it's performative. Your lover identity I can observe and I can see. Your fragmented selves you can hide. Now, I found 5 lover identities in the data. That means those 7 fragmented selves actually form conglomerates in the soul and the soma and come to the place of sort of centering and coming forward to actually present a performativity that one can observe and see. Just as a side, if you go to the SupremeLoveProject.com, you can take what's called the Lover Identity Quiz and find out your lover identity. I encourage you to do it. The SupremeLoveProject.com. It's really a powerful quiz, and what I'll tell you before we go into the 5 is women have a dominant lover identity and a subordinate lover identity. The great thing about this is that your lover identity is not static and it's not fixed. It's just like any other identity that is socially constructed. You can play with it, you can move it around, you can grow it. So when I say you need another lover, what I would say is if you've been relationally or socially terrorized and you have a dominant or a subordinate lover identity that occupies one of these 5, you really need another lover. You gotta change. Because what's gonna happen is you're going to become stuck in toxicity and spin out the cycles of pain and abuse for the rest of your life. And time won't heal any wound. There needs to be an intentionality to deep healing. And the more time you spend on the planet, the more time you'll understand how true that statement really is. It's better to just bypass trying to figure it out on your own and get some help. That's what I would say. Okay? So here are the 5 lover identities. I'm going to tell you them specifically. You can write them down and then we'll go through each of the 5. I gave them in addition to, just like the names of the fragments itself, I wanted them to be catchy. I wanted people to remember them. That's why I personified them. The 5 lover identities, I also gave really cool names. There's main chick, side chick, Bonnie. Now Bonnie is taken from the Bonnie and Clyde motif, so she's the ride or die chick. Victim and bitch. Main chick, side chick, Bonnie, victim, and bitch. Okay. Before we go into that, let's remember what a lover identity is. It's your entire relational ideology and way of being. What I am saying is that if you have one of the 5 that I just named, if you have a warped lover identity, you're in trouble. I'm going to read the definitions of the lover identities. At first blush, to some people, they actually don't sound that bad. I've been in audiences where some of the women raise their hand and say, well, I would actually like to be a bitch. At least she's strong. Or I would like to be a main chick. She's got a man. Maybe a Bonnie's not that bad either. She develops a lot of skill for being a Bonnie. I would argue and push back against all of those things. A warped lover identity does so much damage in terms of your soul and your soma, and your capacity to actually form relationships that are emotionally healthy, socially positive, sexually fulfilling, psychologically safe, even culturally and politically profound and impacting, that a toxic lover identity can actually stunt your life, even if you don't know it. Literally, even if you don't know it. I'll explain how. Here's the description of a main chick. Okay. Can everybody read that? I'll read a little bit. So a main chick is the head of a pack. If you're a main chick, you are a leader. You are an overachiever and desirous of, and not accustomed to, the finer things in life, although it's not your preference. You don't mind being out in front and running the show. You know how to get things done. You are responsible. You keep up appearances. You want the rights, titles, privileges, and accoutrement that comes with having a person who gives you the finer things in life, or the basic necessities of life, along with a notable title such as wife or wifey. That's where you get social capital, and a main chick wants that capital more than anything. She's willing to do almost anything to keep it. Okay. I'll read down to the bottom. So it says, although you want to be cared for, you're not quite sure how to accept care. This is ironic and confusing to many people because you expect devotion along with respect. You're pretty tense, a little stressed, you worry a lot. At times you have been envied by other women, and quietly you've actually enjoyed that a little bit. Your lover identity often enables chronically abusive men, thereby endangering other women in addition to children in schools and society. That last sentence is one thing that a main chick may not be aware of. Now, this is not to be confused with a woman who's just partner. It can be actually quite healthy and be partner. And I'm not anti-partnership or anti-relationship by any stretch. I'm talking about a main chick, someone who's been relationally or socially terrorized and has not claimed her wounded parts, has not done deep healing, and has then partnered. She's doing so unconsciously. And in the wilderness of her soul is actually making decisions from a place of toxicity. So that last sentence is key. When people ask, well, how does this lover identity actually hurt anybody? Because the institution of marriage, which is now available to everyone, is very valuable and very meaningful and very fulfilling. Of course it is, in and of itself. However, when two people do that institution from the space of pain and abuse and violence, whether it's quiet or loud, that institution becomes in itself defiled. And a main chick enables chronically abusive men, thereby endangering other women in addition to children in schools and society. I'm going to give you examples of all of these. Here's a side chick. Now, we often say that we don't have to explain side chick. Side chick is a mistress. She's the person who is sleeping with someone who is partnered, either legally or socially, Very interesting to study this lover identity. Side chicks are usually pretty strong on the inside, but if you are one, you're weak on the outside. You melt with touch, taste, tickles, and stimulations. This one is sort of led by the fragmented selves of Kagan. Remember Kagan with the licking lips? She's at the front of the soul, and the side chick manifests as the lover identity. So a side chick gets confused because she's had semblances of the titles that a main chick enjoys, such as wife or wifey. However, they're only given in flashes. The titles granted are bestowed in secret. They're rooted or grounded in a pattern of observable normalcy that happens outside of the bedroom, not rooted or grounded that way, or hiding place. A side chick feels desperate a lot, is subject to obsession and anxiety, struggles with a particular type of depression that feels normal. And here again is the bottom line. A side chick thinks it's normal to not get what you want and exceptional to get what you need. Lots of allowances, socially, culturally, emotionally, physically, sexually. Side chick is essentially, if occupied for a long period of time, is essentially a ghost. This is a Bonnie. So Bonnie is a powerhouse. She is a ride or die chick. She believes in standing up for her man and standing in for him too. Men take advantage of the work ethic of a Bonnie. A Bonnie often stomachs abuse and sees it as a part of the process of winning the admiration of her Clyde. Here's the thing about a Bonnie that a lot of people miss. Bonnies need to please. They need external affirmation like a drug. A Bonnie has given her money, her home, her self-respect to her Clyde at various times and in various degrees. A Bonnie often has no real idea or understanding of boundaries or standards. A Bonnie believes this is a way to earn status, to make herself indispensable, to distinguish herself from other women. A Bonnie believes this even though this way of being is destroying her. I am a recovering Bonnie. My dominant lover identity was main chick, and my subordinate was Bonnie. So I was bad. Like I had a major lover identity, a huge lover identity, and I thought that I was on the right track. Until I ran into the toxicity and the violence and the abuse and the deleterious nature of these lover identities in real life. Then there's a victim. Now the victim is the trickiest lover identity and actually the hardest to cure. And mainly this is because victims suffer often from dissociative disorder. They remember abuse that didn't happen, and they also remember abuse that did happen. They function in paradox. They hate themselves and love themselves. They hate their partner and love their partner. And also, they're dichotomous in most of their nature. So a victim is either meek, mild, timid, or unsure, or cunning, deceitful, evasive, and slick. Stuck in survival mode, bound to a martyr complex, suffering relentlessly. They do not apologize. They speak and think in absolute language. It's very easy to find the representations of lover identity in data because they always win and always lose simultaneously. And then there's bitch. Also one that we know well. You think you know her well. So bitch is like the baddest chick, right? She's often loud, gregarious, profane. Sash is the fragmented self that is occupying the center and higher up space in the soul, that is pushing forward the performance of this lover identity, for sure. The thing about a bitch, or a woman who's occupied the lover identity of bitch, is that she also has a dichotomy similar to victim. She can be very loud, very brash, very arrogant, very in-your-face, caustic, and cause people to believe that she's exceptionally strong, someone to emulate, to respect, to fear. However, a woman can occupy the lover identity of bitch and be very, very small and sort of meek in her appearance, but actually she's seething under the surface, making designs and twists that could actually hurt other people. Did anyone ever read the book The Help or see the movie The Help? I'm trying to remember the character's name. The white woman in the book who ate that pie, you know, she was a bitch. She was not loud or profane. She was very dainty, very much the lady. But she was occupying that lover identity to the hilt. She was very violent. Incredibly so, surgically so. Okay. Now I think we have time to see some examples of these lover identities in real life. Can somebody give me the time?
57.
How much?
3:57.
Maybe I'll just show one. Okay?
I can't promise that myself, but you didn't say anything.
I know I didn't say anything,
Can you hear
but
this?
I'm asking your integrity
Sorry.
since I did.
Camille Cosby, 7 years younger than the comedian she married, but a commanding presence in her own right. Here, praising civil rights activist Dorothy Height at her funeral in 2010.
Her clear determination and strong positive self-perception did not allow several men who acted out egregious sexist behaviors to push her to the background.
Last November, she sat quietly by her husband's side as Bill Cosby declined comment on allegations he sexually assaulted women, asking the Associated Press not to air his on-camera answer.
Now, can I get something from you
What's that?
that none of that will be shown?
I can't promise that myself, but you didn't say anything.
I know I didn't say anything, but I'm asking your integrity that since I didn't want to say anything, but I did answer you in terms of I don't want to say anything of what value will it have.
He made people laugh for years with his hit The Cosby Show. His TV wife, Claire Huxtable, said to be based on Camille, who even made a guest appearance. Married over 51 years, Camille was only 19 when they tied the knot, meeting on a blind date. She dropped out of college, but in her 30s, she went on to earn her PhD. His career took off with I Spy, the first American TV drama to star a black man in a leading role. It was the height of the civil rights era. Together, they have 5 children, their son Ennis murdered in 1997. Around that time, Cosby first faced public allegations of infidelity. Autumn Jackson was convicted of trying to extort $40 million from the comedian after threatening to tell tabloids she was his out-of-wedlock daughter. In court, Cosby admitted to an affair and payments to Autumn's mother, but denied he was her father. Back then, the family's publicist read a statement on Camille's behalf.
All old, personal, negative issues between Bill and me were resolved years ago.
He's never been charged with a crime and never publicly admitted any sexual assault. Today, more than 25 women say Cosby sexually assaulted them, dating back to the 60s. Mrs. Cosby, for the most part, has remained silent, except for a statement she released last fall. The man I met and fell in love with, and whom I continue to love, is the man you all knew through his work. He is a kind man, a generous man, a funny man, and a wonderful husband, father, and friend. He is the man you thought you knew.
Okay. So, do you see how damaging that lover identity can be? Now, I don't know Camille Cosby, but if I were looking at the definition of a lover identity and the way that that lover identity performs itself in public, and how that lover identity actually enables men who are really accessing the most privilege to do violence that the white supremacist patriarchy will allow, that would be it. For 50 years, we don't know how many women Bill Cosby allegedly molested, raped, or abused, or intimidated. And Camille Cosby, one would argue, or could argue, is complicit in that violence and in that abuse. Because as a main chick, she would not do anything to disrupt the home and the empire that she built with that man. The reverberating effect of that one lover identity can go on for generations. We're already talking about 50 years of abuse. Now, this is an example of a side chick. I don't know if I'll play it because we're running out of time. But can anybody see who that is? Say again? It's Fitz. So in this video clip, you would see Olivia Pope actualizing that lover identity of a side chick. One of the reasons that that lover identity, don't shake your head, that Olivia Pope. One of the reasons that lover identity is so toxic, one would sort of argue that it's toxic because it breaks up relationships, it breaks up marriages, it breaks up homes, it breaks up families. That's also the easy answer. It's true. Absolutely. Side chick lover identity does corrupt the institution of marriage or the fidelity of partnerships that are, in many respects, a cornerstone of society. We need relationships and partnerships to actually work in order for society to work. So a side chick is complicit with lots of intergenerational trauma, potentially. How many people are the children of divorce, for example, and suffer through that kind of recollection? One of the other ways that this lover identity actually wreaks havoc in the life of a woman is that it detaches herself and causes her to be segmented in such a way that she begins to only see herself as a body, to only understand herself and her fleshly inclinations, desires. And that's very dangerous because the place of the flesh body, the soma, is dying, essentially. It's perishable, subject to change. It's not stable. It's not anything that one needs to base her life on. Her livelihood, her self-esteem, her self-worth, her self-concept. There's a lack of self-trust and self-respect in this lover identity that is very, very deep-seated. And it causes the destruction and demise of the woman. And this is a Bonnie representation. Does anybody know who this is? This is Ray Rice's wife, Jeanine Rice. Ray Rice was the football player. I don't know what team he's playing for right now. He was the football player who knocked out Jeanine Rice cold in the elevator, and it was caught on tape. In this clip, what you will see is Jeanine Rice actually defending Ray Rice, minimizing the assault, professing that it had never happened before and would not happen again, that she had held him accountable for that violence, and that people needed to let it go. She also defended her own character and talked about herself as a very strong and independent person who did not need him and would not stay with him if she felt that she was really in danger. Now, that articulation is notable, and it's well within her right as an individual to say whatever she wants and lead her life however she wants. However, that narrative does not fit well with what we saw in the elevator. To say that that person who hit her and knocked her out cold was not violent, was not aggressive, did not fly off the handle, could definitely be trusted. The physical evidence that we have does not correspond to those statements. So there's a disconnect. And a Bonnie is a lover identity that actually does a great job of performing that kind of twisted mentality to defend that which is violent and toxic at the most basic and apparent level. Bitch. Lover identity of bitch. Do you know who that is? It's Jocelyn Hernandez. She is a Hip Hop Atlanta? Love and Hip Hop Atlanta. She's an aspiring rap artist, and she operationalizes the lover identity of bitch in a very loud, brash way. Now, one of the reasons that this is so toxic for communities, for families, for relationships, is because there are many, many women and girls and women who actually look up to this representation of womanhood and this performance of womanhood as a marker of strength, of definitive energy that needs to be modeled, that can be modeled to gain more capital, social capital, cultural capital, attention from men, which leads to more capital, the acquisition of material goods, which leads to more influence, And when this is done irresponsibly and this lover identity is taken to the max, what it does is it causes a type of facade and masking to happen so that, again, the bearer of the lover identity is not fully invested in knowing the complexity of herself. This person who operates in this lover identity appears to be very brash and very honest and very forthright. However, because Sash and Laish, the two fragmented cells at the bottom of the soma, at the bottom of the flesh body, actually make this lover identity operationalized, I know for a fact that Jocelyn Hernandez has emotional problems that she does not voice her story or own at all. Sash and Laish, Sash is the snarling fragmented self. Do you remember her? Laish is the one that bites her lip. She's intimidated, she's insecure, she's very, very vulnerable, she's not in touch with her self-worth, she's bound with self-loathing. Sash and Laish are two sides of the same coin. Wherever you see Sash, which is most evident in the lover identity of bitch, Laish is not far behind. She's there, very fragile, ready to break. And then we have victim. It's very difficult for you to see this, but has anybody ever read the book Push by Sapphire? Okay? And you've seen Precious, the film, starring, what's the sister's name? I know Gabour's today, but the mom. Monique, who is, she won an Academy Award for that performance. And she played Precious's mother. Monique is a good representation of victim. A woman who occupies that lover identity is a woman who displaces power and blames everyone and anyone else for any social situation, for any breach of emotional boundary, any breach of physical, sexual, or financial boundary, and does not take responsibility for herself or her life. She feels powerless and is absorbing constantly and recreating the martyrdom complex. Now, there are three effects to these 5 lover identities, 3. Dis-ease, that is when in the soul and soma, you're so filled with the residue of relational and social terrors that there's actual toxicity in the soul and in the soma. A warped way of thinking about love and relating, about commitment, about intimacy, about connection, the value and the possibility of any of those things. There is disorder, that is instability, in terms of understanding sort of a way of being that it can be consistent, that can have integrity, and can have congruence, so that your insides and your outsides match. Disorder. The other effect is dismemberment. Dismemberment is a key sign of dehumanization. White supremacist patriarchy does this very, very well. When a person is not centralized by race, gender, sexual orientation, and any number of other identity markers, and is further marginalized, and is more subject to relational and social terrors, the further out she goes, or he goes, in society, there is dismemberment. That means that a person can come up to me in the Target and touch me because I am not fully realized or actualized in the eyes of that person. It means that a man can talk about getting that ass because he doesn't recognize that body part as being attached to a whole person. Dismemberment. Breaking people apart and only seeing fractions of themselves and fractions of the other. These 3 effects, dis-ease, disorder, and dismemberment, make opaque the consciousness to the extent that it can also be cauterized, which means that it makes it very difficult for empathy or altruism to be remotely possible in communion, in relationships, in society. Because when disease and disorder and dismemberment are rampant in the soul and in the soma, we don't know each other. We can't see each other. Mainly because we don't know or see ourselves. There's one solution that I've found. And that's supreme love. Now, I want to say that supreme love is not self-love, and it's not self-care. What I talk about in my book is that self-love is flat and shallow. It's built to make a person feel good in a moment of despair or in a trench-like experience. Self-love can bring you up quickly, but it does not have the capacity to stop you from sinking again. It doesn't have deep enough roots. Supreme love is a quantum force and a quantum consciousness that enables one to understand oneself as a spirit so that you're not anchored in anything perishable. We're able to be deconstructed, so your identity can be spiritualized. You can know yourself as having stewardship over a soul and occupying a body, which is a different orientation for consciousness and identity. So this is a supreme lover. Now that I am a recovering main chick and body, I practice a supreme lover identity. A supreme lover is one who loves without conditions. She's so filled with the power of radical acceptance and forgiveness, deep wisdom and courage that she cannot be deterred in her quest to fulfill herself by anything, such as fear-inducing social risks, perceived relational failures, unintended emotional hurts, threats of personal humiliation or pain, physical abuses and violations, psychological manipulations and traumas, relational disappointments, and the like. This is what a supreme lover knows how to do. This is what self-love cannot teach you. A supreme lover knows how to orchestrate a connected tissue between soul and soma, disparate parts, having been splintered and set apart from relational and social terrors, and generate a coherence and truth-telling in that space. She knows how to rule her kingdom with wisdom, grace, compassion, using the authority of divine words and ideology to do work in the deepest parts of the soul. Supreme love facilitates paradigm shifts in the soul. With the soul, it manifests cumulative evolution in the place of the flesh body so that we be different, actually disabling survival programs, recreating belief systems, deconstructing defense mechanisms, embodying new narrative structures, and regenerating different somatic memory, which is very, very key. A supreme lover knows how to recreate experience so that the meaning making in the soul and the memory making in the soma can be reset. It causes you to go up in wisdom and compassion, out of the muck and the mire of the spaces where relational and social terrors actually live and reside. You can learn how to do this. Now, a lot of people say to me, well, what does supreme love have to do with social justice? Aren't you just talking about people getting happy? Feeling better about themselves? And actually, that's only a little fraction of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about healing the terrors in your soul so that you can launch a revolution in your life. What I'm saying is, if each individual is able to heal herself, she can heal the world. There is a direct correlation between the health and healing, the deep wholeness and coherence and membership of a woman and the state of the planet. There is no separation, and there is no lack. So, supremacist patriarchies hurt and kill people, and supreme love saves and heals people. That's why it's a solution. So what I say is that supremacist patriarchies extend to and include all people. No one is immune to supremacist patriarchies, particularly racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic. What's happening with the executive orders in the United States of America right now are affecting all people. Even the people who believe that they're benefiting from these executive orders are actually being hurt by them. All the social terrors have residual effect and reverberating effect, whether one is conscious of them or not. Cultivating a supreme love identity means building up the internal constitution required to identify, interpret, and facilitate your trajectory of voices, stories, and terrors. It means demonstrating wisdom, compassion, acceptance, radical acceptance, and inclusion in relation to every aspect of self. It means becoming selectively and strategically involved with however the fragmented selves voice and whatever they story. Supreme lover identity is dependent on developing a highly and deeply literate life. It means learning to read, write, speak, and listen to selves on a regular basis. When supremacist patriarchies, constructing racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, ageism, xenophobia, ableism, fatphobia, and the like, fulfill themselves through people and within relationships, indications of supreme love can act as mediator, even savior, in the supreme spectrum of personhood where terrors are seen. So it's by supreme love that you can actually heal supremely, to learn to love supremely, with anchored ascendancy, which I can define, and live supremely. So here's the question. People say, how do I become a supreme lover? How do I develop a new lover identity? Particularly people ask me this question after they take the lover identity quiz. And what I say is you must first know and show deep respect and absolute compassion for each fragment of yourself. The reason I have to make this explicit and make it very, very clear is because when I teach women, for example, how to do deep excavations of the soul and come into contact with the fragments themselves, actually producing story and actually articulating voice in the spectrum of personhood that is in the soul and in the soma, you're going to find very, very terrifying things, horrible things. In your subterranean space, you say really cruel things to yourself because you've been relationally and socially terrorized. And the meaning making in the place of the soul and the memory making in the place of the soma have captured and caught and held on to all of those social and relational terrors, which prescribe your value, your worth, your deservedness, your visibility, your actuality, your credibility. And you've been generating and constructing these meanings in these fragmented parts of yourself for years. So when you do deep excavation of the soul, you have to be prepared for what you tell you. Being a supreme lover and generating a supreme lover identity means generating the fearlessness, the deep wisdom, and the compassion that is required to go in and do those deep excavations and actually do mediation as a spirit between the disjuncted soul and soma, so that you can mediate that space, bring those places back together to a connective tissue that is divine, that actually up-levels your consciousness and your awareness of self so that it becomes thick and deep and complex, filled with healing, cohered, not disordered and dismembered, and whole. It means to choose from both the most divine and base aspects of self, ways to access, engage with, and learn from those voices and stories on a daily basis, perhaps even an hourly basis. It means learning methods for inclusively and radically being with yourself and all that you know as real so that you are deeply able to evolve realities through new epistemologies and new ontologies. A supreme lover is supernatural. All of you are already supernatural. You just don't know. You just need to not love.